It's my distinct honor to introduce the next keynote speaker, Dan O'Day, Chairman and CEO of Gilead Biosciences, one of the most successful and impactful biopharma companies in the world. Under Dan's leadership, Gilead has continued its legacy of scientific excellence, developing some of the most important and innovative life-saving therapies for viral diseases like HIV, AIDS, hepatitis, liver disease, inflammation, fibrotic and respiratory diseases. But since Dan's arrival at Gilead in 2019, he has demonstrated deep commitment to growing Gilead's oncology business, making it a central focus of the company's strategy and investment. And currently, I believe it's still true that over half of the clinical trials are in the area of oncology. Prior to taking the helm at Gilead, Dan has a distinguished career at Roche Pharmaceutical, where his career spanned more than 3 decades as an executive positions across the company pharmaceutical and diagnostic divisions in North America, in Europe, and in Asia. I got to know Dan in early 2019. As you heard this morning, just a few miles from here, we are now, our company, Kite Pharma, was founded with a bold mission of changing the outlook of cancer patients to cell therapy. And we had all these most beautiful demonstration patients to discuss today. Gilead's acquisition of Kite in 2017 was initially led by the late John Martin, was a pivotal moment for the history of our company. And it was Dan who carried that vision forward, strengthening Gilead's commitment to oncology and ensuring that Yescarta not only reached patients, but became a global standard of CAR T-cell therapy everywhere else. We have already heard this morning from Cindy and the CAR T patient, Lori, a testament of the importance of that, and I'm sure that we'll hear a little bit more from Dan today. So Dan's dual focus, expanding Gilead's leadership in antivirals while building a world-class oncology franchise, reflects a rare blend of scientific ambition and strategic integrity. He leads with a purpose and with an unwavering focus on patients as well as we all serve. So please join me in welcoming a truly exceptional leader, Dan O'Day, Chairman and CEO of Gilead.
I think it's still morning. Good morning, everybody. It's terrific to be here with all of you. I'm delighted and honored to be invited back to LABEST. After I took on the role at Gilead, Ari was kind enough to invite me in one of the first opportunities in my responsibility as Gilead CEO to be a part of this community. So I'm delighted to be back here. It's a really, really important conference for me. It's also one that, as you'll hear, is critical to Gilead's mission overall and Kite's mission. But beyond that, the LA area and Southern California is really important to be back here. And I'm down here frequently, of course. But I do believe, and I had a chance to hear some of the panel beforehand, that this ecosystem in LA is a critical one. And it's a particularly critical time to think about how we continue to foster this environment. And we heard some of that from the panel here. It needs, I think, everybody's voice to make sure that we educate policymakers to understand how critical this is. I'm going to tell you a story today about Gilead, but then specifically about a particular product at Gilead, because I had to pick one example that has benefited so much from this partnership and this ecosystem in general in the United States and here in Los Angeles. I also want to take this opportunity, what we strive for every day at Gilead is not incremental innovation, and I have my predecessors to thank for that. They set the bar very high as being, frankly, one of the first companies to cure a disease that afflicted so many in hepatitis C. They've been an amazing innovation and really changed the world in terms of HIV. And it's also why I'm so pleased that my predecessor and Ari got to know each other, and we welcomed Kite into our organization just before I took over the helm. But to Ari's point, it's something I was so excited about when I came here. And one of the big reasons for joining Gilead is that curative potential exemplified itself in the therapy area of CAR T. And Laurie is just such a courageous and terrific example of what we mean and what we strive for at Gilead every day in cell therapy and across cell therapy to come up with cures for patients as we move forward. We're just beginning, and as we heard, the advent of science is really, really coming through. We have a tremendous footprint here in the LA area. Of course, this is our headquarters for Kite, as you know, a few miles from here. We've got one of our premier CAR T manufacturing facilities in El Segundo. So we have Santa Monica, El Segundo. We have a viral vector and a larger manufacturing facility down in Oceanside, California. And completely unrelated to cell therapy, we have an important manufacturing facility out in Laverne. So we have quite a presence here, even though we are headquartered in Northern California, and that's the gravity behind the immensity of our investments. The Los Angeles and California, in principle, are really, really important areas for us. But it's not just about the investment in science. One of the things that Gilead has been known for, and we've carried on since I've arrived, is we really focus on two things, because we believe if we're stretching for that cure and ending epidemics, which are bold words, but I'm going to back it up a little bit of science, we have to do two things right. We have to be scientifically focused ruthlessly, but we also have to be focused equally on health equity. We know that none of these innovations that we're all working on collectively here will do any good for society if they don't get to the people and communities that need them. I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. But that also includes being an organization that does a lot of philanthropic support. And here in the LA Basin over the past 66 years, we've invested more than $60 million in grants to support STEM programs in K through college, to support public health infrastructure, education equity programs. And this includes things like our grantee, the St. John's Community Health Center, that works with the Compton Unified School District on STEM. And we also sponsor a biomedical pathway at El Segundo High School. The best ideas in science don't come from a group of like-minded individuals sitting around a table. One of our core principles is inclusion, and part of inclusion means you need individuals from a wide variety of backgrounds to look at a very, frankly, impossible problem and create a possibility out of that. So supporting next generation scientists and creating a community is really, really critically important to us. I just want to make a couple of comments, not to opine too long, but you have to be an optimist to work almost 4 decades in this industry where 90% of things fail. And while more than 90% of things fail, 90% of things that enter the clinic fail, and while I agree with some of the panelists up here that this is a particularly challenging time for the United States from a policy perspective, I, for one, am not willing to give up. We have a tremendous leadership presence in the United States. There is competition from other countries like China. I personally think competition is good. It should make us better. It should make us sharper. It should make us more focused. There's obviously a need for education on policymakers in Washington, where I spend a lot of time and a lot of you spend a lot of time. But I have to say, my optimism, particularly over the past couple of weeks, continues to increase in the right direction. That doesn't mean we should let up the foot from the accelerator. We need to continue to educate policymakers I'm sure here in LA County, but across the United States, on the importance of the unique ecosystem that we have here in the United States. The concept of the availability of at-risk capital, the tremendous science that exists in this country, and the biopharma industry that where 70%, almost 80% today of the global biopharma investment comes into the United States. So we're right to be concerned about some policy events. We're right to be eyes wide open about other countries that are trying to replicate our model. But we're certainly not at a position where we have any reason to give up our leadership position. And I just want to make sure you understand how I feel about that. So yes, as the new government comes in, we do want to lower costs. We want to look for efficiencies in the system. But the ecosystem that has created, the first gene therapy for sickle cell, new cancer treatments, new medications for schizophrenia in the past 30 years have started to come, and the first real approach to obesity, that happens because of the United States ecosystem, and it's very important that we continue that. So with that, I want to dive into why the ecosystem is so important to Gilead. And I'm going to take one example today, but just as a primer to that, just a quick, very Reader's Digest version of Gilead, because I think you'll learn about Gilead through the story I'm going to tell. We are a company that's based in Foster City, California, just in the Bay Area. 7,000 employees. We're a global company. We were started in 1987. In fact, it was started the same year I joined the industry when I joined at Roche. In fact, it started 2 months after I joined Roche, where I tell my Gilead colleagues I would have joined Gilead first, but it didn't exist when I came into the industry. But it's been an extraordinary company when one thinks about it. A relatively short history when you think about, large biopharma, 38 years. But how many companies that have just 38 years young have cured a disease with a 12-week course of an oral therapy and turned another epidemic, which I'm going to speak about mostly today, HIV, from a death sentence into a chronic and frankly preventable illness. We're not done yet with that story, but it's extraordinary to think about that. We've been focused on major public health challenges for those 38 years: HIV, viral hepatitis, now cancer, and COVID-19, being the company that brought the first and frankly still standard of care for hospitalized patients with an antiviral and remdesivir in the hospital setting. And remdesivir was not an accident. It was purposeful from the intent of Gilead, which, as our world-leading position in virology, to constantly be monitoring viral diseases throughout the globe and being ready for an event like the pandemic or other diseases that afflict particularly developing countries like Africa. You've already heard the story from Ari about when Kite joined our group just before I came in. And at that time, then, we really had to think about how do we diversify? Because as such a world leader in virology, we definitely didn't want to cede our leadership there. There was still such a huge human need in virology and still is today. But as a company that had grown exponentially in a short period of time, we needed to think about how we took our scientific prowess and diversified into other therapeutic areas. We could do more than virology, and we needed to do more in virology given the size of our company. So this is just a small snapshot of how we approached that question, because it was a strategic question when I came in the company that had begun to be explored by my predecessors with the Kite acquisition. But essentially, the whole basis of this, and I'm a big believer in this, is when you look at strategy, you have to look at what your differentiating capabilities are within the company. And at the end of the day, yes, virology was a differentiating capability, but what was really differentiating was our world-class science in immunology, and at the time, and still, our chemistry prowess in terms of being able to find druggable targets for take non-druggable targets and target them with either chemistry. Since then, we've added, of course, as the world-leading company in cell therapy, we're looking not only today at what we're doing, but the next generations of cell therapy. And we have a significant biologic capability now in both single biologics, bispecifics, ADCs. So we add that to that. But this gives you a little bit of an idea on why we selected the therapeutic areas we did. It wasn't random. We purposely chose not to get into areas like CNS at that stage and metabolic because we didn't really have a particular expertise there. I'm pleased that the broader biopharma industry has expertise there. And of course, we could still decide to enter into that, particularly with some of the technologies we have as we move in the future. But this was really the nature of how we pursued our strategy. And today, to Ari's point, we have a broad portfolio. We have more than 27 marketed therapies, 14 phase 3 programs. More than half of those are in oncology. A very interesting early inflammation program that's coming in kind of phase 1, phase 2 now. And that's growing. Obviously, we need to continue to prove ourselves in those areas, but I can certainly say that now, more than half of our growth as a company is coming from oncology versus virology as well. So we have a lot to point to for success. I'd love to talk about all these therapeutic areas, but I'm just going to take one example, if you allow me today, and that's a breakthrough innovation that's fairly recently read out as a clinical trial in the field of HIV prevention. Let me just start with talking about what I was able to inherit when I came into this company about 6 years ago. And that was just, without a doubt, a world-leading journey in HIV. More than 3 out of 4 people in the globe are taking a Gilead medicine to either treat their disease or to prevent their disease. And that was done through an astonishing journey, as you can see here on the slide, where Gilead just kept out innovating itself. So it had the first single tablet regimen. If we can all remind ourselves in the late 80s, early 90s, when people had to take handfuls of medicines many times a day with horrible side effects, it was completely not meeting the medical need and the clinical need. And of course, this wasn't just, a CMC issue. This was a true innovation issue on how to approach different targets in HIV such that you could get to a single tablet regimen. It was also the company that came with the first medicine to actually prevent the disease with a single tablet daily pill. So it just kept out innovating itself. And today, Biktarvy is the true leader as we looked at, an ability to look at, products that were better at resistance. Biktarvy is a 3-drug medicine in 1 tablet that is the world-leading medicine today in HIV. We also came up with the first twice-yearly treatment for HIV for highly treatment-experienced patients, was launched a couple of years ago, Lencapivir in a treatment form. I'm going to talk today about Lencapivir in a prevention form on the next slide as well. I think it's important to note because, many of us don't deal with HIV every day. And I think if you were to go to the general public, they might think that HIV is no longer an important global public health crisis. Obviously, those people that are close to the disease certainly understand that. Even though we made remarkable progress, we're far from over in terms of what we need to do to end the epidemic. In this country alone, with all the resources we have for healthcare, every week more than 700 people contract the HIV virus and 100 people die in this country alone. Globally, more than 1.3 million people every year contract HIV. And that number is on the rise. It's on the rise here in this country, particularly in underserved communities in the southern United States, but not only. And I'll talk about that because a lot of that has to do with, of course, access to healthcare, but also stigma and discrimination that goes along with HIV. We actually have an effective PrEP medicine, but here's the conundrum and the problem. Only about 1/3 of people, and I would say a very restricted definition of people that could benefit from PrEP in this country, actually take PrEP. And of course, one of the fundamental reasons for that in what I would say the informed community in urban areas in our country is that it's hard to get somebody to take a medicine if you're not sick. And it's particularly hard to do that on a routine basis, on a daily basis. So most of that has to do with adherence, and that's one of the reasons why we continue to see that. But our scientists talk a lot about person-centric innovation. So it wasn't just the compliance or adherence problem that led them to the Lencapivir story. It was also the fact that in many communities in this country, there's significant stigma and discrimination with taking anything for HIV, or even taking a medicine, or even admitting that HIV is a problem in a community. And so when our scientists thought about how to take it to the next level, not only did they think about adherence, but they thought about a way to deliver a medicine that could be done discreetly, that could be done in a way that encourages people that don't normally interact with the healthcare system to be able to prevent a disease that's preventable. And I think that was extremely important. It's also important to note that, particularly in countries like Africa, that stigma and discrimination is even higher. Today, around 53% of people that are acquiring HIV are women, and almost half of people that are acquiring HIV are heterosexual. So this is a disease that has transformed itself over the past 30 years, now almost 40 years. And not everybody understands that when they think about HIV and think about new therapies for HIV. Enter Lencapivir. The scientists that I get to work with every day call this a unicorn molecule. I think you'll understand why as I talk about it first and foremost. First of all, it's a small molecule. It's the world's first twice-yearly injection to prevent HIV. It's the first of its kind capsid inhibitor. So as you know, we have lots of different categories of medicines to treat HIV. This is the first one that literally targets the capsid. And the capsid is the protein structure that houses the viral enzymes. Most of our medicines today are acting on the viral enzyme, whether that's for treatment or for prevention. So this is a whole new way of facilitating an approach to HIV that started now almost 20 years ago. The scientific example of how this came about is a perfect example of kind of public-private partnership. It was a collaboration now more than 20 years ago. There was a professor at the University of Utah who's been recognized, rightfully so, Wesley Sundquist, who was working on showing that attacking the capsid and disrupting the capsid would also potentially disrupt the replication of the virus in an in vitro model. One of our scientists, Thomas Seelar, was partnering with Wesley Sundquist at that time. At the time, it was thought to be a non-druggable target. There was no ideas for how to target this, and certainly not to target this in a way that would allow you to have a twice-a-year dosing. I mean, that was completely off the table. So this is kind of the 20-year story that led there. So there was this idea generation because of our ecosystem, and then there was this prowess that Gilead had in both biology and chemistry, and the leaders that led Gilead at the time to really have the perseverance to pursue this particular target. And it was not for the faint of heart. There were more than 4,000 candidates screened, as you can see, over about a 6-year period to even find something that could be potentially viable. And then even once one was identified, the concept of getting a chemistry that would have a long half-life, and that's why our folks call it the unicorn molecule. I mean, having a small molecule that you can subcutaneously inject that has the type of PK that Lencapivir has, I can't think of another molecule like this in a small molecule form. So it's a story of perseverance. It's a story of staying power. And it's a story of being somewhat patient but aggressive over the course of 2 decades. Fast forward to last summer. We started the phase 3 trials in PrEP just after I arrived to Gilead in 2019. It's the largest clinical trial that's ever been done in prevention, more than 9,000 patients across 5 continents with 5 different studies. But the first of those studies read out last June. And I distinctly remember it because I happened to be on a trip in Central Asia at the time with one of our grantees that's working on a huge rising incidence of HIV in Kazakhstan for a variety of reasons going on in that region. And I remember at the time getting a phone call from our lead scientist with this news, and I actually thought that the connection was not clear. Kazakhstan was, when he told me, Dan, this was a trial done, the first trial was done in cisgender women in Africa, largely in South Africa, but also in other African continents. He said, Dan, not a single patient in the Lencapivir trial contracted HIV. Never been done before. I don't know how many of you know. On the next slide, I'll show you. I mean, it was truly extraordinary at the time, and to be in a place in the world where it was raising was quite incredible. So you see, the Purpose 1 study was done in cisgender women. That was purposeful. That was important. The second trial was done in a large collection of individuals vulnerable to HIV, and it showed 99.9% efficacy. And that trial read out about 2 months later. And this is what you can see. I mean, some of the extraordinary outpouring of support for this, obviously from the community, most importantly, the patients, or people, I should say, that participated in this trial. It was really, quite a global position to be in. And it's interesting. I don't know how many of you know Dr. Linda Gale Becker. She's an extraordinary researcher in Africa. And I think her quote maybe says it all. But it again shows this partnership. You can see some of the accolades that some of our Gilead Sceinces have received, some academic scientists, some community support folks. It is just terrific to see this. It was the Science Magazine Molecule of the Year last year, which I can tell you is one of the greatest accolades we could ever have at Gilead, because we pride ourselves on science. And it's one that we take both with great pride, but also with great responsibility. We immediately understood the responsibility that we had in our hands when we got these results, and why the science and health equity piece come in, which I'll talk about in just a second. So we are on track now. I heard some conversations around the FDA. I can tell you that our interactions with the FDA, not only on Lencapivir, but on our other programs, continues. It's productive dialogue. Also had a chance to meet the new head of the FDA. And I think as far as I can tell, there's a real intention to make sure that organization continues to be the world-class regulatory authority. We expect our PDUFA date is on June 19th. So we are certainly prepared to roll this out in the United States. But as we know, viruses don't know any border. What we did immediately after we got those results, and we had this in the planning process, is the first trial result came out in June, the second one in August. By September, we had already voluntarily licensed Lencapivir to 6 generic manufacturers for more than, on a royalty-free basis, to more than 100, so they can supply to more than 120 low and middle income countries around the world as quickly as possible. The tech transfer occurred within about 2 months because we were ready to do that. It will take them a couple of years to come up to speed, but we did, and that's unheard of. It's never been done before an FDA approval. We also filed in a variety of countries at the same time we filed in the United States, because what we want to do is make sure we don't have a gap, or as little of a gap, when we roll this out in the United States than we do in the rest of the world. So that's our goal and objective. We're still working along those timelines and that time frame with partners like the Global Fund, PEPFAR, the Gates Foundation, who are all deeply embedded with us to make this story happen. And I think it's really, really important, because at the end of the day, how can we possibly end the HIV epidemic, which is our goal, without ending it globally? So I just want to say that I know this is only one story, and thank you for engaging with me on this story, but it is both an example of other stories that exist within Gilead, and certainly other stories that exist within the biopharma sector and biopharma community. And I know there are so many companies represented here that are so proud of what they're doing, and I'm so proud of what they're doing too. But I want to end with one comment, which is it's such a reminder of why this conference is so important. At the end of the day, we have to make sure that this ecosystem here in Los Angeles and around the United States continues to be fostered. Our voices are needed at this time to make sure that that happens, even in the spirit of looking for some efficiencies, because Lencapivir and all the other medicines that we're talking about at this conference won't happen unless that occurs. So I, for one, will be a strong proponent of that. Thank you so much, Ari, for inviting me here today, for allowing me to tell a little bit about the Gilead story. And I thank all of you for the opportunity to tell this story. Thank you very much.